Dishonorable Mention is brought to you by 813area.com. 813area.com is the place to go to see where to go and what to do in all of Hillsborough County. Whether it's the best events, the newest restaurants, or where to be in Tampa Bay, 813 Area is your resource for everything happening around town. For the latest on where to be in 813, check out 813area.com. Dishonorable Mention is now on social media. Follow us on Facebook, and we're at Dishonorable Pod on Twitter too. Next week, we'll start taking questions from Twitter because y'all have been an amazing part of this. Thank you.
All right, welcome to another episode of Dishonorable Mention, where we are gathering to talk about 90s hip hop, 21st century politics, and everything else that turns us on in life.
That's amazing.
Why don't we start with the Tampa mayoral race? This past Tuesday.
Go easy now. You're getting take it gentle.
Voters went to the poll. They voted on the 7 candidates running for mayor in Tampa. Jane Castor finished on top with a surprising 48% of the vote. And in second place was a financier, philanthropist, David Straz, who finished far back with only about 15% of the vote. What was your take on all of that, Carla?
Yeah, I don't know who this David Strauss guy is, but, never heard of him.
Not relevant in your world.
No, not really. He's just, probably in the back counting his money, swimming in it.
Another Scrooge McDuck reference.
I can totally do the DuckTales theme song right now, but I'm not going to.
We look forward to that in
Isn't
the
that
future
great? Yeah.
podcast. Chris, what was your take on the mayoral race?
I think that it's all but over now, and it's not always the case in runoffs that the person that finishes in first will win. I think this, unless something drastically changes big time, to the point where Jane Castor literally would have to get arrested, there would have to be videotaped evidence, and Straz would still have to convince voters why he should be the choice. I think it's all but over, and I think that it'll be a long month or so until the general election. But the fact that she finished as far ahead as she did. And I think some of the other, and I may be wrong, but some of the other folks that ran, I think, have already come out in support of her. So I think,
Harry did.
Harry Cohen, who finished third, has endorsed Jane. And perhaps even more importantly, the outgoing mayor, Bob Buckhorn, has now endorsed Jane now that the general is over and the runoff has started. And I think those will be key factors. But, and I was telling Becca this, turnout tends to be lower in a runoff. Do you think that could somehow give Straz a chance?
Well, here's where I'm concerned. So on all the progressive, discussion pages online, the conversation is, and this will sound very familiar to a 2016 presidential election. The conversation is, we don't think that Jane represents all the people. We don't know what Straz can do, so maybe we should give that a try. So I think you're going to find a lot of progressives, progressives that end up voting for him because they think that's in the best interest, and I think it's pretty short-sighted.
Yeah, there are a couple of challenges to Jane's campaign. One are some of the decisions she made as police chief regarding the African American community. There was a program that disproportionately ticketed African Americans on bicycles. Jane also used to be a registered Republican, so there are some sense that she is not as liberal as progressives would like.
Guy.
Well, true.
And he was a Democrat before that, though, so I feel like, that doesn't really mean anything. And a local election shouldn't mean anything if you're a Republican or a Democrat anyway. I don't think that we should run on party for local.
So are you saying, Carla, that you're now more open to a Straz as mayor?
No, because he's an asshole, so no. But I think that, I don't think that you should look at political party when you're voting locally. I just don't. And I think that these people who look at Jane, who's a very diverse candidate, yeah, she's like your white lady, I get it, but she's also a very diverse candidate in a lot of ways. So to be like, oh, well, she has too many Republican donors, like, don't you want bipartisanship? Don't you want people who are strong Democrats and strong Republicans supporting one person? I feel like that really shows that's a strength. And I think it's bullshit that people would support, Harry, who's a really good guy. And to be fair, I don't know if I can say this, but I voted for Harry in this past election. I think he's a great guy, but he's kind of like Palmacia Princess. So if you want to talk about the least diverse candidate, it's Harry. So to have these progressives, like quote unquote progressives, try to support him over someone like Jane, I just think is bullshit. And I think it's thinly veiled strategy.
Yeah, I just think if you look at the entire field, you have to put a high value not only on Jane's diversity, but on her administrative experience. She has run a department. She has handled a multi-million-dollar budget. And those are things that Mr. Strass does not bring. Although he has done well in the financial industry, he has never overseen a municipal department, a municipal entity, and that has to factor in. It would surprise me if Jane loses. It's almost a foregone conclusion that she's going to win. But if the turnout is really low, if Strass is able to plunk down even more money on television advertising, driving up his name recognition, he's already spent $3 million. God only knows how much more he'll spend. There could be a chance. And there are also maybe people who think, I don't need to go vote in the runoff because Representative Latvala said it's all but over and Jane's going to win. So I don't need to worry about Jane winning. All of those things are possible. But in the end, I think the next mayor of Tampa is going to be Jane Castor.
As long as her supporters are not complacent,
yes,
and they get out and vote, I think it's going to be a 60-40 race.
Yeah, and she's already launched a television campaign. And the one criticism is that had she launched that before the general, she may have taken the general and eliminated the need for a runoff. She might have got a 50+1 if she had pushed a little harder.
I don't think they expected her to get such a high turnout.
It was surprising.
Yeah.
It was surprising how close she came to eliminating the need for a runoff.
Yeah.
Hey, so Chris, what's happening in Tallahassee?
Yeah, Chris, what's happening in Tallahassee?
On a personal level, my Jordan's Law bill passed its first committee this week, so I was very excited about that.
Tell us about that.
It is a child welfare reform bill that came about as a result of the tragic death of Jordan Beliveau, a 2-year-old toddler in Largo who lived in my district. And the bill seeks 4 changes that I believe would help kids that were in similar situations like Jordan. The first is that law enforcement would be notified if a parent was subject to a child protective investigation where they were being investigated for possible child abuse, child neglect. Second part would be a training for law enforcement, child welfare folks, judges, etc., in the identification of possible brain injury for a child under the age of 6. I had numerous meetings leading up to filing this bill with different experts in the field, whether it was judges, law enforcement officers, foster care folks, doctors, child welfare folks, so forth. And one of the doctors I met with believed that Jordan, just by reading the case file, believed that Jordan had multiple concussions before his death, which is very tragic. And as you know, identifying brain injuries in toddlers is almost impossible to do. There's millions of dollars that's spent on brain injuries when it comes to NFL players and even some juvenile sports, but the most critical population is the young toddlers, because as they get a concussion, their brain may never fully develop the way that it should. The third part would be a pilot program to bring in more caseworkers for the under 6 population that are in the system, and it would be based on counties that have and circuits that have the largest amount of children that are being taken out of their homes and attempted to be reunified. So we wrote it in such a way that Tampa Bay should be in the running to be part of this pilot program. And then the fourth is a concept called intensive reunification, a baby cap program similar to what Directions for Living does in Pinellas County, where they have a intensive reunification for children under the age of 6, where the caseworkers are more involved. They go out to the houses more often. There's more intensive work for the biological
to make sure they're making the right decision by reunifying the child.
Absolutely.
With the biological parents.
Absolutely. The goal of the bill was to give the people that make the decisions, whether it's law enforcement, case managers, and judges, more information in their toolbox to so they can make decisions that are, best for these children that are of such a vulnerable age group.
Well, that concludes our segment on what's going right in Tallahassee. Now let's talk about everything that's going wrong. Chris, I understand the legislature is trying to force K through 12 students to take Bible classes. What's up with that?
Well, that isn't exactly factual.
Did I get that wrong? Did I get that wrong?
Just somewhat.
My bad.
The bill that was filed by a Democratic colleague of mine out of Jacksonville would mandate each school district offer as an elective course a class on the Bible, and that it would be taught through a historical and objective lens.
Real quick, since education is something you're so passionate about, before we go ahead and allocate funds for that, what do you think they should cut that should be set to the wayside to make room for this Bible class?
Well, there hasn't been any decisions.
Science, perhaps?
There hasn't been any decisions that have been made in terms of funding and, in terms of the budget. But if there is a fiscal impact on such a bill, that would be something that would be looked at. In classes and high school classes, you can already take religion classes. You can already take classes that look at literary works throughout history. And I would argue, not from a Christian standpoint of the importance of the Bible, but also from a literary and historical standpoint, that the Bible is very important. It's the number one best-selling book of all time. It's been translated out of more languages than any other book throughout history. And, like it or not, there is a historical nature of the Bible that has been proven by both secular and non-secular historians throughout history. So whether, thousands of years ago, there was a great flood. There were also other things that happened in both the Old and New Testament.
Well, that wraps it up, folks. It's clearly
Sorry,
word for word.
Wait, the flood I want to come back to.
There was a flood.
I know.
Yeah, and as we know, the male and female unicorn forgot to get on the ark, and that's why we don't see them anymore.
When they got on where they just can't see them because they're they're magical.
Oh my gosh. Okay, go ahead.
You know what? What troubles me. And I would agree with you that the Bible is an important book in terms of its historical context. But what troubles me is that I think this bill and some other discussions we've heard are rooted in a belief that teachers are all left-wing, pinko commie social liberals.
Yeah, we are.
And they're brainwashing students into being liberals. And we got to get in there and change the school curriculum so they can start teaching people the right thing.
Well,
That's where I think this is rooted from, and I find that to be really disturbing.
And as a college professor who's taught cultural studies for kind of a long time, I think that you should teach world religions, and if you wanted to take a class on the cultural history of the Bible and kind of the uptake of that, I think that's fine. I don't think that's what this is. So, and I think if you, just the rhetorician in me always looks at naming, right? So when you call it a Bible study or a Bible class, that has a very different connotation as if you're looking at, something else. So you could say it could be world religions, or you could say, the Bible in Bible and world history or something like that, but calling it just Bible class or Bible study, I think that it has a different connotation and different cultural history attached to it that makes me uncomfortable.
Well, clearly it has that intention, because in the meeting when they were discussing this, when Representative Latvala voted to advance the bill, Anna Eskamani asked the question, can we include additional religious texts such as the Quran? And she was like, hard pass on that. So, I mean, no, it's not about just studying religious texts. It's very specific to one religion. And there's many world religions. And if soon as you can show me a school where they teach a single class on the Quran or a single class on the Torah or any of those, Sikhism or any of the other top 10 religions in the world, then maybe we can have a conversation. Otherwise, it's just veiled, trying to chip away at the separation of church and state.
So in high school, I remember taking classes that taught about Islam, taught about Muhammad, Hinduism, Buddhism, etc. Specifically, I don't think it delved into the Quran, but I remember being taught about the, Muhammad as the person and so forth. There is a big misconception, though, regarding bills that get filed in Tallahassee. Just because a bill gets filed by somebody doesn't mean it's going to become law. Just because it passes a single committee doesn't mean it's going to become law. So whether it's my bill regarding child welfare or another bill, just because they pass a committee doesn't mean that it's being fast tracked to become law. The bill that y'all are talking about regarding the Bible, there's not even a Senate sponsor for it. In order for a bill to become law, it has to pass both chambers of the legislature. And
I know we often doubt my civics knowledge, but I do know that to be true.
I never doubt your civics knowledge, Becca.
Well, that's because you haven't asked the right questions.
What else is happening in Tallahassee?
Well, we're going to be releasing the House budget in probably next week. So I am been busy preparing that and working on the education portion of it. And I think it'll be something that, there will be parts of it that y'all like, and there'll be parts of it that, liberals such as yourself might not like. But
Now, I think we're going to be troubled by an expansion of the school voucher program. No doubt about that. But we know how I feel about that. Don't get me started again.
Well, I really am disturbed about that because I've started looking much more closely at the schools that are on the choice list. And while we have some, and I'm going to use Pinellas County examples, we have some excellent schools that are religious in nature but teach a very secular education, such as St. Paul's Independent Day School. So happy to see they're on there. Wonderful academic opportunity, but they are being drowned out by schools that are, one, openly discriminatory, and two, don't even all teach real science. So I think that there's, we talk about not having equitable expectations, but when you go even further and there's blatantly discriminatory policies, that's problematic. And so I am holding my breath that I don't implode and have to go nuclear, because I just think if we put taxpayer dollars directly towards schools like this, we are doing a grave injustice.
You know what it sounds like? It sounds like we're going to have to make a road trip to Tallahassee. That's what it sounds like.
I'm in for that.
Gas up the car, Becca. Carla, you in?
In
100%.
Colin?
100%.
This is like, please no.
Y'all can set up shop in my office.
Yeah.
He'll lock us in there and he'll be like, guard the door. Don't let him out.
Now he'll speaking of biblical history, he'll deny us 3 times before the cock crows. I don't know those people. They're not with me. They were not at my office. You wouldn't do that, would you, Chris?
Absolutely not. I would welcome y'all with open arms.
I think we should rename this podcast to How Many Times Can We Make Chris Uncomfortable? Because he makes this uncomfortable face so frequently.
But it's so cute, though.
My favorite was last time when Carla was trying to get him to go to a gay wedding with her without her husband. That was probably over the line.
Oh, that was pretty good. That was
Yeah,
pretty
it was
good.
great. We could still go. Congratulations, Greg and Jamie.
Greg and Jamie. I wonder if they know Deneen. That's really the question. You know, there's all these intersections of life. I mean,
And love.
I don't think they know
Other
the
podcast.
name.
Save it for the other podcast. Save it for Finding Deneen.
oh yes.
You have to save it.
So, speaking of Tallahassee, they are also very close to passing a bill at the urging of Governor Ron DeSantis that will make smokable medical marijuana legal in the state of Florida. What took so long for that?
Well, I can tell you that I voted for it in the Appropriations Committee a week or two ago, and I plan on voting for it when it hits the floor. As to why it took so long.
I pictured your new political campaign, Bibles and Bongs. Go ahead. I'm so sorry. That's all I could think about.
That was amazing.
But I do not know why it took so long.
We are not going to get on the 700 Club with references like that.
I don't think they let Jews on the 700 Club
all
unless you're a
fun and
Jew for
games.
Jesus. I'm not a Messianic Jew.
And we digress. Back to smokable medical marijuana. Chris.
I don't know why it took so long, but I think with the governor's leadership and with others, both in the House and the Senate, I suspect it'll be a reality very soon.
Good. I think it's the right move, especially for people who need that treatment because they're suffering from any number of maladies, including migraine headaches.
Here's my issue with medical marijuana is that, like many things, it's very classist.
Do you suffer from migraine headaches, Becca?
I do, just like you do. It's one of the many bipartisan things we have in common, the passion for ending migraines in this country. But the thing that's interesting to me is that access to medical marijuana is exceptionally expensive. So while it is a great thing, and there's tons of research that supports how helpful it can be to cancer patients, people with everyday pain, suffering. You really have to have a lot of disposable income in order to even access it. And so that's one of my biggest issues is that we may be creating more open windows for people who can get on that access track, but it's still far too limited.
But you're whitewashing it. So all of these people that have been suffering from migraines and ovarian problems and all that stuff can now access it, but you're putting money in the hands of people that are quote unquote like legitimate businessmen and women, whereas people who've been doing this for a long time are criminalized and are sitting in jail because they've been doing the exact same thing big corporations are now doing, and that's bullshit.
Yeah, that's an argument you hear a lot in the African American community. Oh, yeah, you going to throw us in jail for the last 25, 30 years. Now, when it's legal, we're not seeing any diversity in the medical marijuana industry. I mean, it's a real issue, and we should be seeing more diversity in the ownership of those companies that are going to profit from medical marijuana.
I mean, if Governor DeSantis is really serious about not being racist, I think that he could maybe develop some sort of program or spearhead a program where they could bring in the Black community as entrepreneurs and maybe, you know, try to make up for some of the social injustice regarding medical marijuana that's been taking place. I don't know.
Yeah, there was some discussion about that this week because in his State of the State address, he did acknowledge several African Americans. Some saw it as progress, others saw it as pandering. Becca, what did you think? You know, he started out by talking about the Groveland Four. He mentioned school vouchers and had an African American parent as an example of someone who needs an expansion of the program. Did you feel like it was progress from our state government, or was it pandering?
I really try hard to be unbiased and be fair, but my gut says it's pandering based on the person we've seen up until this point. Now, I could be proved wrong, and I hope that I am, but his relations with so many different racist type organizations, it doesn't mean he's a racist, but as who I wish was our governor, Andrew Gillum, said, the racists think you're a racist. And that's not so long ago. So I do know that the expansion of school vouchers does help some families of color. That's one of the things Chris and I have talked about at length. And he's helped me see that vouchers are not bad, but I do not think they should be the catch-all. So we vary on how that should be executed. But I do not vilify vouchers in certain circumstances. But yeah, I mean, I think it's very easy to pander. Is it personal progress? I doubt it, but anything's possible.
I will interject. The governor is not a racist. And there are several reasons why. That's just something I know as a fact. Literally, one of the first things he did as governor was to pardon the Groveland Four. That was not something that was set up for him to do to make him look, politically like a unifier. The legislature passed this bill last year, and for whatever reason, Governor Scott chose not to pardon them. And so, but literally one of the first things he did as governor was to apologize and to pardon the Groveland Four and, to apologize to their families. One of the ladies that he recognized during his speech at the State of the State was the daughter of one of the guys that was falsely accused. Secondly, expanding the voucher system is not racist. The kids that are benefited the most from that are kids that do not have the same financial means as the folks at this table had growing up. And it's predominantly minority students that are benefited from not having to go to their neighborhood public schools, which oftentimes do not perform.
By the way, I just want to point out Colin comes from very meager means, but keep going.
True.
And, and there are other things that I think will show that the governor is not a racist. And I think the argument that he is a very ignorant argument. And it comes from during the election, his opponent trying to divide folks. And, and I think that the African Americans voted for Ron DeSantis in such a manner that it kept Andrew Gillum from winning.
Yeah, here's what I would say. I don't think he's a racist. I think Governor Gillum was right to raise questions about his record.
Or Mayor Gillum.
Mayor Gillum. Thank you for that correction.
Good, though. Good.
I think he may have been guilty of pandering in his State of the State address. But I'd like to point out we went 8 years with a governor who was never accused of pandering, if you know what I mean.
No,
he didn't really, Governor Scott never really made the effort to do any kind of outreach to the African American community. So, in my opinion, in that regard, Governor DeSantis, even if he is quote unquote pandering, has taken a step above where we were before with Governor Scott. Now, there's more to be seen. We need more action, more policy decisions. It has to be more than, as your third grade English teacher always said, show, don't tell. He's got to show us if he's serious about this.
Can I just clarify two things? It is my understanding that Nikki Fried is the one who brought it to the cabinet, and it was one of her major initiatives to pardon the Groveland Four. So I don't even think it initiated with him. But either way, that's number one. And number two,
I think during the election, he said that was going to be one of the things that he was going to do. As one of the first things that he would do in office.
Okay, I'll check into it because the most recent article I read in Florida Trend about Nikki Fried kind of talked about how that was one of her priorities that she first brought to the cabinet.
Right, and I think that was certainly a priority of hers too. And I think she's also doing a good job in her first few months on the job. And I will say, as a member of the legislature, as a member of the majority party in the legislature, I have worked more with Ron DeSantis's office in the first couple months that he's been in office than I did in the entire 4 years that I was up there under Rick Scott. And
question, do you think that's because Governor DeSantis possesses some higher political aspirations beyond being governor? Is that why we're seeing more of a moderate tone, more outreach, more collaboration, more cooperation?
I would suspect, and I don't know this to be fact, that once he got elected, he realized that he represents the entire state and he's the leader of the entire state. And so some of the decisions that he's made early on have been from that lens. And I don't know, I've never asked him if he had, higher political aspirations, but I can tell you that I'm very satisfied with the way that he's done things. Rick Scott, was a different kind of leader. And, one day he would be your buddy. The next day he would literally be in your district calling you out by name because of votes that you made. And so, it's just, a difference in leadership styles. And frankly, I'm more looking forward to, serving with a governor like Ron DeSantis.
Carla, is he trying to be governor for the entire state, or does he hope to someday be president?
I think he can be both. I mean, I think it's cool if you can serve the entire state and realize, hey, there's some low-hanging fruit here, and I can make a lot of people really happy just on some really simple things that I can do in the first 100 days. And I think that's a really, really smart move. It's good strategically, but if he wants to set his sights on being president one day, vice president, or even run for senator eventually in the next, 10, 20 years, and yeah, I think it's a good move. Great. But I don't think those two things have to be mutually exclusive.
And I think for far too long, the Republican Party has not had the same focus on the environment as it should. And I think he's kind of bringing that back because that's an issue that should be a bipartisan issue. Republicans care about the environment just as much as Democrats do. And so, I think that's certainly something that he's going to focus on. And I suspect that will be one of his legacy things that he does.
I just want to clarify one thing
that you were wrong and I was right.
No, if that ever happens, I'm happy to go on the record saying that. But my only other issue is, and again, I don't know Governor DeSantis. I'm only making a decision and a assertion based on things I've observed, but he has spoken at organizations and with people who are very openly racist and I believe anti-Semitic. And as somebody who has worked as a professional speaker for 15 years, I don't go to a conference that I don't know who's putting it on, and I don't know what their mission is, and I don't know who I'm sharing the stage with. And I also won't go if it's all one type of people or one voice. So I'm very mindful. And I think he's way too bright to not know the construct of the people he's been sharing a stage with. And that's where my concern comes from. Not just because Mayor Gillum said that he was racist. It's because of those types of choices.
When I speak to a group, and frankly, I'm not as popular with groups as, somebody running for governor or congressman or so forth.
Wait until they hear this podcast.
But I don't go and Google the leadership of that group, to see what that group stands for. I go and speak, my mind and speak my truth. When somebody, asks for a picture, I don't, go and Google them before I take a picture with them or before I talk to them. So I think he, like anybody else, is responsible for what comes out of his mouth and what his beliefs are. I don't think that just because he knows somebody, that may be a racist means that he's a racist.
I think we're asking the wrong question, though. Like, I don't care if he's a racist or not. I just don't think it's the question we should be asking. So, I think there are a lot of inherent racist structures and people in this country, and we don't scrutinize every single choice that they make. It's more about a system, and it's more about, okay, does he support systems that enable structural racism or not? I think that's the question, because I think you'll find a lot of people who wouldn't identify as racist on both sides of the political spectrum that do. So I don't think that's necessarily the question.
So you mentioned who you take pictures with. I just want to give you a little advice. If someone comes up who's the founder of an Asian spa and wants to take a picture with you, you might want to Google her first.
But she looks so nice.
And that is precisely the reason why I am a member of Massage Envy. And I I don't go to places that might be a little sketchy. So, and I think another aspect that will be focused on both from the governor's standpoint and the Republican legislature will be on criminal justice reform. And I think that has the opportunity to reach across party lines and to be something that helps everybody. But I stay away from the Asian spa places.
Good move. Good move. Hey, I want to ask you guys a question. It just popped into my head. In the last week, we have seen in the news some very critical, dare I say, scathing assessments of two entertainers, Michael Jackson, the late Michael Jackson, and R. Kelly. My question to you is, can you separate art from the artist? Can you say, I love Michael Jackson's music, but I don't love what he may or may not have done with some kids? Can you say, I'm a fan of R. Kelly's Ignition remix, and at the same time cast aspersions against him because he allegedly kidnapped and brainwashed young teen girls?
Yes.
Can you separate the art from the artist? Becca?
I can't, but I don't know that that's fair. And let me say one thing. We are much faster as a country to condemn a person of color that's an artist than some of the other folks, but it just ruins it for me. I mean, like, I used to love the show Glee. Like, remember when that first came out and how groundbreaking it was and the things that they addressed? And since half the cast has turned out to be
troubled, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, we had everything from, pedos to drug addicts and like all these different issues. I wanted to go back and watch the show, and it's just ruined for me. And so I personally, because I've worked with survivors of violence for so long, I can't separate. I don't hold anybody. That's not a deal breaker to me for somebody who can. I just cannot.
Do you watch Woody Allen movies?
Not anymore.
Oh, seriously?
They almost took away my
Interesting.
Jew card for that.
Chris, what do you think? Can you separate the art and the artist?
I have never been a Michael Jackson fan, and I think part of that is because of my age, being perhaps the youngest.
We're
on
the same
podcast.
age, Chris. What the hell?
But you're a grandmother, so that's different.
What the French toast?
With R. Kelly, the two songs that I know of are "I Believe I Can Fly" and remix
Ignition, the greatest song of all time.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, and I like that song, and I'd probably still listen to that song.
But can you rap it, or can you do the whole thing?
I will later.
Cool.
I don't want to, cause us to lose viewer or listeners.
I love that Chris has a family member that was like, "What studio are you shooting this in? Where can I watch this?" And he had to
So,
educate
anyways,
them.
I can tell you from a personal side of things, I don't look at Kevin Spacey the same that I used to. I love, one of my favorite shows was House of Cards, and I don't look at it the same as I do now, having revealed what he's been accused of in the past couple of years. And there's also other Kevin Spacey movies that I probably would not watch as a result of that. And there's other actors and entertainers that are kind of the same way.
And I think it also depends on what the crime is, because, like, for example, the sexual abuse of children or sexual abuse issues are really hard for me to get past. I understand some people, like, remember when Kramer from Seinfeld went off the rails and started yelling racist trope? I can understand how some people might be able to separate what feels like an isolated incident versus
Systemic
which I don't
behavior.
know that it is. Yeah, right,
Sure. Yeah, I get
versus
that. I get that.
predatory behavior.
I get that, but I also think there's selective outrage when it comes to these things, and it really bothers me, especially as an academic. And we have it just, here's the thing. If you're going to get mad at and just kind of write off Woody Allen or write off Michael Jackson, you're going to have to write off most people in American history, most people in global history, and most people in pop culture. George Washington's teeth were made of slaves' teeth. Let's think about that for a second. Are we going to write off the Constitution and be like, the Declaration of Independence, Constitution, that was probably
Thomas
not
Jefferson
a great thing.
had some issues,
Thomas
too.
Jefferson had some major issues raping a woman for years.
Okay, but we can look back on history
Right.
and educate educate ourselves and say, okay, that was not okay. We see the time.
Absolutely.
But what we're privy to in the here and now, we can't be like, well, it's the time.
No, I'm
We'll
not
look back
saying
on
I'm not
this.
saying well it's a time. I'm saying that you have to separate the person from doing some really awesome things and the person being an asshole.
You risk being guilty of hypocrisy.
You really do.
If you pick and choose
Absolutely.
who you're going to like and who you're not going to like. However, I do think there's some kind of unknown chemical equation at play here. It's how much do you love the artist? What did they do wrong?
Right.
To the third power plus
There's like some weird Venn diagram that where the things
public
overlap.
reaction
Yeah.
equals rejection or not rejection.
Agreed.
I think if it's found to be true, and I believe it's true, I can let go of R. Kelly. I can't let go of Michael Jackson. I can't.
Okay, what about
Really? So if I started like
I-
hot and
I-
fresh out the kitchen, mama rolling that body.
I'm-
No, you wouldn't. You
It'll
wouldn't
be a
jump in.
fight.
You
It'll
wouldn't
be
jump
a
in
fight.
here.
It'll be a fight. I'm tempted to jump in and start singing
Right?
with you.
What
But-
if
Sipping
Carla
on coke and
taped a
rum.
version
I'm
of
like,
that?
so what? I'm
And
drunk.
then you can just
It's
listen
a
to Carla's
freaking
version.
weekend, babe. About to have me. No one's gonna jump in here.
No,
Fine.
I'm not here for you. I mean, I know that I can separate myself when I could break up with Bill Cosby, who was my second father growing up. When the Cosby Show went down in a blaze of glory, and everything that he seemed to stand for, in many ways, very positive. He did have some other issues, but yeah, no, I think that
Bill
some-
Cosby was interesting, though. Bill Cosby represented himself in a lot of ways. Like, it was the Bill Cosby show. So the line between the character and the actual person in his performative life was blurred a lot.
which
So that's
is
an interesting
so weird
example.
that it's the Bill Cosby Show, but his name was Cliff Huxtable.
I know.
It's so
Don't you think
confusing.
that's weird?
I don't understand it.
I think that was a branding thing that was just.
I think we should have realized there was some, sociopath type
Yeah.
tendencies here early
I
on.
agree
But
with
the
that. That was
father
weird.
he represented on that show
Yeah.
was considered to be groundbreaking at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It was considered to help elevate the lives of African Americans and help society see that African Americans, it was wrong for entertainment to simply cast them and have shows only about them living poor or struggling lives, and that we needed to see African Americans as middle class, as a successful doctor, as professionals, as people who aspired to go to college. I mean, in many ways, the show hasn't lost any of its redeeming qualities. The man behind the show, the star of the show, is now a convicted felon and apparently a very, very troubled individual who mistreated women. Does that diminish everything that the show accomplished? You remember what the show accomplished, right? I mean, you remember how it was held as this groundbreaking program, right?
Yeah, I do. And it was a quintessential part of my childhood, but I'm also could never watch it again with the same lens. I mean, and even the fact that he threw Lisa Bonet off the show because she was too provocative in that film with the fans, I forget what it's called, and threw her off the two shows, both The Different World and The Cosby Show, shows how deeply misogynistic and troubled he has been and was, and I can't forgive that. I wish I could sometimes just go to a movie and just enjoy a movie, but I can't. Too much of my work is a part of who I am, and it takes the joy out of entertainment when I know that there are people who have paid a very high price for their celebrity.
I think it's a fascinating debate. I really do.
I think
and
it's-
you ask me tomorrow, I might have some different answers for you. I'm gonna be honest, but go ahead, Chris.
I think it's different when the person has died. So, I think
interesting.
it's common knowledge that Michael Jackson was a different kind of human being than most people of society.
That's so polite.
But he's dead, so he can't come back and defend himself. I mean, yeah, some of what he did while he was alive, whether it's the amusement park, having the, friends that were, 12-year-old boys, that's weird and that's different in a lot of, norms of society. So, but he's not here to defend himself. John Wayne's not here to say whether or not what he said in 1972 in an article is how he really believes, or if that was just him being provocative.
Now, I think that's a really good point. It was troubling to see this documentary come out that impugned the reputation of Michael Jackson, and he's not here to defend himself. His family's here, but it's not the same. And on the other hand, I guess somebody might say Thomas Jefferson's not here.
Well, moral of the
defend
story
himself.
is do things and don't let anyone find out until you're dead, so that you can't be held accountable. But I just think okay, so as an academic and as somebody who I think is still, I have kind of a foot in government, a foot in industry, and a foot in academia, but I feel like the field of cultural studies is committed to social justice, and it's committed to really, unmasking those kind of systems of oppression. A lot of the people that we used to do that were not nice people. Heidegger was a Nazi. Foucault gave people AIDS. And yet we use these rhetorical and cultural tools in terms of their texts to be able to do some really important academic and political work. So, I don't think anyone's immune to that. All I'm saying is, where do you draw the line? If you're going to get upset about one thing, if I'm going to get upset about Michael Jackson, do I get upset about Foucault giving people AIDS and therefore I can't use him in my academic work? How does that work? I don't have the answer for it. I just think it's complicated, and I think it's pretty nuanced, and I'm glad we're having this discussion, but I don't think it's something that, is going to be solved.
All right, if you could see one person living or dead in concert, who would you choose?
Ooh.
John Lennon.
Really?
Why?
Oh, because he is my everything. I love everything about him. He was very flawed. He cheated on his wife. He pretended he didn't have a kid for a while. He was not a perfect person, but his complexity and the evolution of his music and standing in history, that's without a doubt. I don't even care if the other Beatles are there.
Chris, who would you like to see in concert, living or dead?
I'll go with R. Kelly to hear. That is a good question, and I was hoping you wouldn't call on
there
me.
are no wrong answers on this podcast, but that is the wrong answer.
I would say, and y'all will laugh at me, but probably Garth Brooks.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I wouldn't laugh at that.
Because I can't think of somebody else at the moment, so I'm going to go with Garth Brooks.
Oh, interesting.
Because I'm
Garth
not
Brooks
like a...
sold out Notre Dame Stadium.
I'm not like
yeah.
a Beatles person or Rolling
Do you have some
Stones
unanswered prayers, Chris, that you'd like to talk about?
I just think Chris has friends in low places.
and as evidenced by the 4 people that I'm spending my morning
That
with.
is so wrong on so many levels. We're nice.
I am in a low place. I own it. I don't deny it. We need to go and get drunk one night, really. That is the last thing we haven't done.
We almost did, and then we almost crashed a high school football game, remember?
I have no
What are you
recollection of
talking
walking.
about?
Do you remember?
I
we
was
were at
not
that
there
Chris
restaurant.
Val and Becca Teeter were not a part of this.
Yeah, you were.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
That
were.
was Carla and Deneen.
and Dave.
We were one Uber driver away from crashing a high school football game.
I have no
but
idea what you guys are
I
talking
could
about.
pretend I had a kid and be like, yeah,
Selective
little Johnny
memory.
on the field. No, all right.
Carla, who would you like to see in concert, living or dead?
Living or dead? Is it
Beethoven, Bach.
maybe Barbara Streisand? I've never seen her. I've never seen her live, and I feel like she's getting up there. So probably Babs.
I'm sure she'd put on a great show.
She's amazing.
Yeah. I have seen Prince in concert, but if given the opportunity, I'd love to see him again. It was many, many years ago, and then the only other legitimate chance I had to go see him, I invited my wife. I called my wife at work and said, "Hey, Prince tickets are about to go on sale. Give me a call back if you want to go." And she called me back and said, "Hey, my girlfriend's at work. Just got us all tickets. I'm going with them." And so I didn't get to go. I
That's
know.
really cool.
What was your
But,
favorite Prince song?
And I always said, I have so many. I don't even know where to start with that question.
Would you like to do a tribute to him?
I have an entire Prince list on my Spotify. And by the way, you can listen to this podcast on Spotify. But I have an entire list of Prince songs on my Spotify account. I listen to them all the time. I'm very much old school. The things I grew up with, starting in 1978 with his actually 76, I think, with his first album. But such a fan of his, and his music has helped me deal with the emotional torrents in my life.
From the University of Florida around 1984.
Yeah,
85.
some of those indeed. So
She wore a raspberry beret.
Oh, we're
I don't know if I was that devastated. But
Wait, can I? Oh, sorry. Can I change my answer to Spice Girls?
sure, you can change
Tell us
your
what
answer
you
to
want,
Spice
what you really,
Girls.
really
Have
want.
they committed any crimes that you may or may not have known
I don't
of?
think so. Spice Girls.